Well, as Jim introduced, I'm Michael Byrne. I'm the research officer here at the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And so today I'm going to give a talk honouring the dead and serving the living. It's all about the history of the Northern Ireland War Memorial. So we've done this ahead of the launch of our history, which is coming out in 2 weeks, with the same name, which I've written to celebrate the 75th anniversary of our opening. There we go. So the Northern Ireland War Memorial started, they talked about it during the war from about 1943, but it wasn't until after the war in June 1946 at the British Legion Northern Ireland Conference that they finally decided to do something about it. And they established the British Legion War Memorial Building Fund. And fundraising kicked off with a grand dinner dance in December 1946. Now, at the same time as this, the government wanted to have a war memorial themselves, particularly honouring the American presence here during the Second World War and the bonds of friendship that they made while here. So in July 1947, they agreed to match our funding pound for pound up to £100,000. So you can see this is the start of the first of our crests. So in the top left corner, we have a ship representing the Royal Navy, a tank representing the Army, bottom left, planes representing the RAF, and then barrage balloons representing the home front, because they didn't just want it to be a military memorial, they wanted everyone to be involved. And you can't really make out in the image, but around the centre there, it's the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just Belfast thing, they wanted it to be all counties of Northern Ireland. So when we were established, we had a fourfold purpose. So we were a war memorial to honour the memory of the people of Northern Ireland who'd been killed in the First and Second World War. We were to be a symbol of the links and the friendships which had been forged between the USA and Northern Ireland during the Second World War when they'd been stationed here. Around 300,000 American troops passed through here. We were to provide office accommodation for military charities, which cared for the welfare of ex-servicemen and women. And we were going to be an entertainment venue for ex-servicemen and women. The whole idea was that we were going to be a living memorial. It wasn't just going to be a building or a statue or a static memorial. We wanted to be used by the people, and it was that sort of living remembrance. So after the government joined us, the appeal was relaunched in 1948 and a fundraising office was established in Blitz Square and High Street. And that area had been very badly affected during the Belfast Blitz. You can see a photo there of all the cleared area. So what our offices were 3 tram cars welded end to end, and that became our fundraising office. And so it opened on the 16th of November, 1948. So it's 75 years ago in 2 weeks' time. And that's when we're going to be launching our book, hopefully. And it was opened by Basil Brooke, Northern Ireland Prime Minister at the time. We were delayed by a couple of hours because Sir Basil had to get back from the Houses of Commons because he was there to celebrate Prince Charles being born. So his birthday is just a couple of days. He's 2 days older than the War Memorial. That was on our opening. You can see it finished there. And there's quite a good attendance. This also, at the same time, or a couple of days later, Basil addressed the nation in a radio broadcast. And he said, whatever our position in life, whatever your politics or religion, we all have this in common, that we owe our survival and all the amenities of our daily lives to those who fought for the 2 world wars. Ours is an obligation of honour. Freely we have given, freely let us give. And the fundraising started immediately. We started selling torches of remembrance, and Sir Basil actually sold them directly to the public, and they raised £3,000 just in the first half an hour, which was a significant sum of money then. The torches of remembrance, the idea was building or businesses and organisations would buy these torches, and it would be part of some sort of centralised memorial. Now, that memorial never came to be, but a lot of businesses did buy into it. The Robs, Gurwich's, a lot of the department stores. And then this is, I think, the daughter of Barry's Amusements. She was the young daughter of her. There was obviously other fundraising appeals. So there was the odd shillings and pence appeal. That was just the idea to get your loose change, and they would collect it in buckets. And at the tramcar offices, this was in December 1948, they had a mechanical Santa, which looks quite horrifying in the photo from the newspaper. But apparently you put the money in the bucket and it would say thank you and Merry Christmas. Other fundraising appeals, we had the Mr. Gifts badge campaign. So as you can see here on the right, we have the badge of the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And what you did, you bought those badges, and if you were wearing them on set days in different towns, a man called Mr. Gifts would come along and he would give you prizes. Could be restaurant vouchers, silk stockings, anything really. But if you were wearing your badge and you were proudly supporting the Northern Ireland War Memorial, then he would give you a prize. We don't actually know who Mr. Gifts was. That doesn't survive, but maybe work out one day. Our most famous fundraising campaign was the 2-ton cake that was made. So this was quite literally a 2-ton cake that was created by Scriven Kemp. We appealed internationally for the ingredients, and most of it was sent from Canada. A man that had been born in Belfast and had later emigrated, he wanted to show that he supported them, and they flew it all over. And this is actually, I think, 200 pounds of shortening arriving at Great Victoria Street Station on the train. They flew it to Dublin and then to Shannon, I think, and then they brought it up on the train. And then on the right here, you can see Scriven Kemp bakers, they're icing the cake. And how that raised money was that people bought ballot tickets. And if your ballot was drawn, you got an £8 slice of fruitcake, which was quite substantial then, and particularly with rationing still going on. And then you can see the advertisement in the newspaper of the winning tickets. So we had to find a site for the War Memorial. The idea was that because Stormont were putting up the money, Belfast Corporation would contribute by providing a site for the War Memorial. It took a long time, about 10 years, for us to finally secure a site. The first and short-lived suggestion was St. George's Variety Market. You can see it down there in the bottom right. Basically, that was suggested by one of the Belfast councillors, and it was immediately vetoed. For a long time, it was going to be in Cathedral Gardens, what was known as Boy Park. It's just across the way there. And for some reason, we don't know, for years that was where it was going to be, and for some reason it never materialised. We don't know why it was cancelled, but it was considered for a number of years. So although there was a recognition in 1948 that the Belfast Corporation would need extra powers to be able to grant the land to us, basically they couldn't just give it to any charity. Nothing really was done about it until 1955. When that started, the Belfast Corporation Bill started going through Parliament, we started making preparations, and an offer was put in on Queen Street / Fountain Street. But that was Water Commissioner's site, and it was a blitz site. But unfortunately, we don't know why, but the offer was rejected, and kind of quickly then we tried to find a site, and Waring Street, where we were on Waring Street, 25 to 21 Waring Street, was where we finally decided to buy it at the price of £17,250, which works out about £350,000 in today's money. And so what that, the Belfast, we paid it, and the Belfast Corporation agreed to pay us back. And actually they had to borrow money from Stormont to do so. But we got there eventually. But in that 10 years, there was lots of delays and lots of tensions between all the different organisations involved. At one point, we fell out with the Belfast mayor. He refused to come to a couple of meetings. Stormont government blamed the corporation blamed them. And basically, nothing happened for 10 years. And this led to great sort of a general apathy from the general public, because they'd obviously contributed their hard-earned money. 10 years later, there was no memorial. And in those run-up in the 1950s, there was a lot of calls for people to get their money back and to give the money back to the British Legion, and they would do something with it. I think the leading idea was to make a car park, and that would raise money for the British Legion. So it wasn't until 1955 that they were in a position to offer a design. And we decided to put a design competition out with the Royal Institute of British Architects. So the idea was the building had to honour the dead and serve the living, and that is, of course, where we get our title from. And the budget was £100,000. There were detailed conditions and instructions drawn up. There had to be a public hall, which we could seat 750 people, a function room, office areas for different ex-service charities, a specific office areas for the British Legion, and then living quarters on the top floor for a caretaker. So out of 62 entries, the winner was John Michael Bowley. who was from Sevenoaks in Kent. And his idea was an imaginative 6-story building in a modernist style. So the ground floor contained a boardroom, foyer, which was the Hall of Friendship, an American Hall, which was 2 stories with a mezzanine, boardrooms, offices, up to 4 floors, and then caretakers at the top. His costs were projected to be 134,000, so it was over budget. So we had to modify what his design. So the American Hall was reduced in size to a single story and became the Queen's Hall, and it was a dual function. It was going to be a function hall and a public hall. Boardroom and function rooms were combined to make a minor hall, and the foyer was to double as the American Hall of Friendship, which meant that we could cut costs, we could lose a story, and that brought costs just under that we could keep it in budget. So the foundation stone was laid by Lord Wakehurst on the 30th of June, 1961. All the major religions were represented, ex-service charities, British Legion, ex-servicemen as well as the Army General Officer Commanding Lieutenant General Sir Douglas Packard. And they had a moment of silence, and he laid the foundation stone, which you can see there, and it's at the back of our museum today. He said at the time that he was sure that it would be here when we are gone to help ex-servicemen and to those who are serving. It would earn a permanent place within the life of the city. And he thought that was very important. So here we have a mock-up of the construction. We have a photo of it under construction from the Belfast Telegraph. Not particularly a great photo, but it's the best we can do. So it took about 2 years. That's the finished building there. It took about 2 years. And then on the 29th of October, 1963, Her Royal Highness Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, opened us. So it was actually 60 years this week that she came. The Queen Mother was greeted by Lord Wakehurst, Lord Lieutenant Daniel Dixon, Baron Glentoran, and our chairman, Sir Norman Strong, who was Speaker of the Stormont. At the time, she said, the memorial was not just a building of brick and stone, it will be a fitting home for the British Legion and many other ex-service organisations who would take home in the building. And we do have a clip. We also have Belfast Telegraph. So the thousands of office girls in Belfast City Centre forgot their work for 2 hours today as they left their desks to secure vantage points for full view of the Queen Mother when she arrived. And we do have a clip. There we go. This is her arriving at Warren Street, being greeted. The Guard of Honour. Her having a look at their books of remembrance, which I'll talk about a bit in a minute. And then she had a look around the Regimental Museum, so the Royal Ulster Rifles at the back. It was there until earlier this year. So this was the ground floor layout. You went through the ceremony entrance straight into the Hall of Friendship. On the left was the minor hall with a memorial window, which is here, and that led you out to a small car park. On the right, we had our plinth and flags, and you went straight through into the Queen's Hall. And then they had office accommodation above that. We do have some photos. That's the view. There's the memorial there, and that's the Queen's Hall. Just so that would have been as you walked in straight ahead of you. And then that's one of the boardrooms. So key part was that we had a memorial, obviously, in our memorial building. And it was on the west wall, directly opposite the stained glass window. It was highly polished black Belgian marble. Immediately in front of this was a plinth of Ulster granite, which was 6-sided to represent the 6 counties. Upon this plinth sat 2 large red leather-bound books of remembrance, one for the First World War and one for the Second World War, and that records all the men and women, any servicemen and women who died in service for the Queen and country. This is our stained glass windows that surrounded the entrance to the car park, and it was created by Stanley Murray Scott, who is quite renowned stained glass maker from England. He worked for Reed, Milliken & Co. in Newcastle upon Tyne, and it can be found, his work can be found in churches and civic buildings across the UK. It was installed in 1963 and surrounded the small car park. Yes, so at the top, you can't see it here, but you can see it on the photo, is a laurel wreath with a dove symbolising peace. Along the top, then, there's the crosses to symbolize all the sacrifices that were made. And then on either side, you can see them here, were 2 columns of fire. And in front of them are different symbols of the armed forces, nursing services, ARP, and things like that. The nursing service is an interesting one because it's a combination of the Red Cross and the St. John's ambulance. They've just amalgamated them together to make sure everyone's being included. Another piece of art that was commissioned was by James McKendry. James McKendry was from Bushmills in County Antrim, and they really wanted a piece of art that marked the American presence in Northern Ireland. So there were two distinct panels of bronze, which you can see along here. One at the top is the Americans arriving, and you can see there's sort of an idea of a forward motion. They're marching into battle, and you can see the tanks right up to Port Moon in County Antrim as they're leaving. The second one is the people of Ulster Freeze, and that was all about the home front. You can see images of industry, farming, the Belfast Blitz. You can see the shipyards. And originally, these faced each other across the Hall of Friendship. And so you can see here the man waving. He is waving to the American man on the other side. Originally, they faced each other, so it made sense, where it doesn't really make sense now. So once the building had been opened and established, it was time, we'd honoured the dead, and it was now time to serve the living, to become a living memorial. And the key idea behind that was that there would be ex-service accommodation for charities. So some of the original tenants were Combat Stress, the British Red Cross, the British Legion, SAFA, St. John's Ambulance, and the Not Forgotten Association, some of which are still with us today. There was also to be an entertainment venue for ex-servicemen and women. One of the first events held was annual dinner from Ireland's disabled ex-servicemen, and that was in the month we opened in October 1963. But it was also a space for charity fundraising events. The British Legion would hold their Easter fair. You can see two women judging cakes there. And the one on the right is a strange one. What is the name of it? It was the National Cactus and Succulent Society. They were having a show, and they were doing it to raise funds for the Forces Help Society. But other organisations started to use our facilities. There were public lectures and debates, AGM, shareholders meetings and concerts. Another popular one was obviously dinner dances, a great pastime at that time. However, it wasn't without its problems having the building open to the public. In April 1964, only 6 months after we opened, the Union flag was stolen from the Hall of Friendship. It was quickly found again, and the man was fined for stealing it. He said that there was no malice intended, but we do think he had a bit to drink. At least that's what the newspapers tell us. So then you have the beginning of the Northern Irish Troubles, and we have a war memorial in the centre of Belfast, which was meant to accommodate ex-service charities. Social events dried up pretty quickly. People did not want to come in because they felt there would be a big target on the war memorial and obviously their events. But then because of that, we got some new and diverse uses and audiences. So it was used for auctions, there was conferences and public information events. From 1979, we were the home of Belfast Small Claims Court, and for a number of years in the 1980s, it was the Worldwide Church of God used to hold their services within the Queen's Hall. Although the War Memorial Building was never directly targeted to our knowledge, we know from reports from maintenance at the time that in 1983, there's been collateral damage from some of the bombings nearby. Basically, all the cladding had cracked on the outside of the building, and water was starting to leak in and cause damp and damage. And so they needed £6,000 to fix these issues. And then this photo is from the IRA bomb at North Street Arcade in 1976. So that would have been one of the very closest bombs to the War Memorial. So towards a heritage centre, in the first 2 decades, we weren't really fulfilling our purpose. We couldn't really be an entertainment venue for ex-servicemen. And although we were offering charity space, we couldn't fully embrace our intended purpose of honouring the dead and serving the living. And it was in March 1986 at a property committee meeting, they were discussing the lease of the Church of God, the Queen's Hall to the Church of God. And Major John Potter suggested that could the Queen's Hall be used as some sort of regimental or military museum? That was greeted enthusiastically, and it went to a full board meeting, and that sort of kicked off everything. And in November 1986, interested parties met to discuss the potential future, whether they could have a military museum. That included all the regimental museums as well as national museums, Northern Ireland, with the Ulster Museum. So they agreed to share their curatorial and exhibition planning expertise on the condition that we were self-financing. We would take in the donations and we would keep them. They wouldn't have to fund us. So in 1988, there was a feasibility study done, and that really said that there was a sort of a gap in the market. International tourists would be able to come and use our facilities and learn about the Second World War in Northern Ireland, and that the ground floor, with a bit of modification, could become that site. So an appeal was launched in 1989. You can see here, this is Captain Harold Smith, who was one of our chairmen. In his report of that year, he says that everything has been leading up to this decision to make the Homefront Heritage Centre, and that he wishes that hopefully it will have good success in years to come. And he stood down and was then replaced. So the fundraising drive had an ambitious goal of £1 million. It didn't really, although we had a lot of donations of objects and photographs and documentation, and people were very enthusiastic about having a military museum, the funds didn't follow. And it was only in 1995, when the Northern Irish Tourist Board granted us £60,000, that they could actually get designers in. And we got Attractability, which was a firm based in Leeds, and they designed a heritage exhibition called Memories of the Homefront, 1939 to 1945, and it's focused on 4 key areas which we still represent today: civil defence, women of Ulster, American presence in Northern Ireland, and military service at home and overseas. And you can see here the design for one of their Belfast area wardens, which is still over in the corner there. And you can see all the other mannequins that they helpfully designed. We brought them with us from Warren Street. So the new exhibition was opened in May 1996 by Admiral William James Crowe Jr., the US ambassador to the UK. And this is him photographed here with Colonel Ian Gailey, who was one of our first sort of secretaries and curators in charge of the museum side of things. You can see photos along here of the side of different exhibition parts. You can see the photos, obviously, of the 2 Homefront men and the Women of Ulster display. So the exhibition proved particularly popular, and there was 1,400 visitors in 1999. And that just continued to rise until we eventually had to close, and it was a high of 3,000 in 2006. Throughout this time, we had different donations to the museum. Chief among them was Francis Minor. He visited in May 1999 from New York, and he donated the uniform jacket in the top left corner. He was technical sergeant in the US 608th Quartermaster Graves Registry Company, and he also donated his diaries. And so he was in charge of burying any of the US servicemen that died in Northern Ireland up at Lisnabrini Cemetery in the Castlereagh Hills. He landed in Normandy on D-Day +3, and he also had a role in the European theatre of war, particularly with the POWs massacred at Malmedy in 1944. Other donations included Sir Richard Pym cigarette lighter. He was in the RNVR, and he was in charge of Churchill's map room throughout the Second World War. A couple of years ago, well, a good few years ago now, we published a book all about Pym and Churchill's map room. That was by John Potter. And then at the bottom here, we have 3 medals of E.J. Dickinson, including the Civil Defence Long Service Medal, and they're still on display today. So just as we opened, Colonel Ian Gailey was forced to retire due to ill health, and he was replaced by Major John Potter, who originally suggested we have a military museum. Major Potter, along with the exhibitions committee, managed and expanded the exhibition year on year. They would have temporary displays, and as research was done, they would put more displays up, and greatly helped with the expertise on the exhibition panel. So Colonel Robin Charley, Brian Barton, and Ernie Cromie, among them, experts in their field. We were able to then as well host travelling exhibitions. We hosted the 60th anniversary Imperial War Museum exhibit in 2005, which aimed to bring school children together with veterans who would talk about their experiences. Also key to that, John Potter attributed much of the success of the War Memorial to the two Bobs that you can see pictured here. Both were veterans themselves. Bob Pritchard in the top served with the RAF between 1940 and 1946 and joined the War Memorial as a security attendant around 1986. His role evolved as the building did, and he ended up as a gallery attendant, welcoming children and people visiting the War Memorial and sharing a bit of his memories of serving in the RAF. On the bottom, we have Bob Wright. So Bob joined the Welsh Regiment in 1938 and was part of the British Expeditionary Force at the fall of France. In 1943, he then volunteered to the British Army Commandos and served in Norway, Burma, Japan, and Singapore, and finally Hong Kong, where he met his wife in 1947. He joined the War Memorial in 1988 and worked tirelessly as a museum attendant for 27 years, receiving a BEM for his services in 2012, and finally retiring in August 2015, just a few months before his death, aged 97. So by 2000, Memorial House would require major refurbishment. Didn't have double glazing, so that was a big thing. Electrical work needed to be redone, mechanical work as well. The whole lift system had to be replaced, and the whole building needed to be reclad. So a commissioned report in 2004 offered the board 5 options. They could do nothing, which obviously they weren't going to do. They could refurbish the War Memorial building, which was just not cost effective for them. They could downsize within the War Memorial building, the idea being that they sell the top 3 floors onto a different company. That was very much seen as a short-term solution for a long-term decline. So the other 2 options were to sell the War Memorial building and move somewhere else in Belfast, or to combine with the Somme Heritage Centre. So basically inevitable that we had to sell Memorial House, and this is where we ended up on Talbot Street. There was 2 buildings that they were focused on. They couldn't decide between them. One was on Hill Street, basically where the Dirty Onion Bar is now, and then it was Talbot Street where we are today. So we were officially opened in November 2008 by His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent. And we couldn't just leave behind the work that we put into the Memorial House. So we had to bring some of the artworks that I talked about. We had to bring the memorial itself, obviously, the McKendry friezes and Stanley Mary Scott's stained glass window. And because we brought them in and we redesigned the exhibition around them, we were given the Royal Society of Ulster Architects Award for the best example of integrating artworks into a building project for that 2008. We also wanted to commission some new artworks. So we had the Blitz Memorial by Carolyn Mulholland here. And so this is to give you the sense of the destruction of the Blitz, the pieces of charred wood symbolising the fires and the buildings destroyed, the people affected, and the cutouts sort of represent the people that we lost and the spaces that the people left behind within those families. Our second piece of art was Blitz Survivors by John Sherlock. You can see at the top, or it's just right behind you there. And that's a bronze sculpture depicting a woman running through the cobbled streets of Belfast from the Belfast Blitz with her daughter in hand. And this was very much based on John's own personal memories. The little girl was based on a girl he met the day war was declared, and he couldn't understand why she was so upset, because she was convinced that her daddy and his daddy would all go away to war and they would never come back again. Our final piece of art that we commissioned was called April Showers Bring Forth May Flowers, which is by Diane McCormick, and that's in the hall as you enter. The whole idea from this was that the April Blitz encouraged regeneration, that the bombs from April were turning into May flowers. And so she had porcelain bombs and porcelain flowers printed with different things that are associated with the war in Northern Ireland. So newspaper articles, photographs from our own and her own personal archives. And we finally achieved a museum accreditation in 2013. So 75 years on, we're still here and we're still working away. In 2023, we had 8,400 visitors, which included just under 3,000 school children and just under 1,500 people reached in informal groups on outreach. So you can see here our learning officer, Hannah, interacting with the school just at the back. And then in the bottom right, we have a Sing for Victory workshop, which our partnership engagement lead organises with retirement homes and dementia-friendly groups. It's trying to encourage them to think back, and they do that through song, singing old classics, Vera Lynn, all those different songs. We also obviously still collect. We are a museum first and foremost. We have a number of different objects that are donated every week. So recently we had this Purple Heart that was donated to us from a local woman in Ballykindler. Her mother had been a driver in England during the war, and she'd driven around a lot of Americans, and one of them had, just for some reason, the daughter didn't know why, but he donated Purple Heart to her, and she wanted it to go somewhere that it would be looked after in future generations. My main role here as research officer involves the oral history project. So we also have over 200 interviewees from across Northern Ireland, people describing their memories of the Second World War. And we feel that's very important to capture those moving forward for future generations. Very much so, our vision for the Northern Ireland War Memorial is to become an engaging and welcoming museum that provides a window on Northern Ireland's key role in the Second World War and the impact on its people. So that's me. Do you have any questions for me?
Very good. You mentioned the charity that were upstairs, the Excel Museum. Maybe they're actually still here.
I don't know if the SAF is still here. Combat Stress are still here. Who else are here? Help for Heroes. Is that it? Right, there we go. So there's still 3 still here.
Well, it was strange to say that in the original War Memorial building, that the open architecture competition was won by a man from, I think it was Kent, is that right? Were there many architects from home here actually entered the competition? Strange that none of them, if none did, it's strange.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in all our research, we know that there were 62 entries, but we don't actually know the names of any of the rest of them, apart from Granville Smith, who I think he was local, and he came 3rd in the competition, and he was brought on as an associate architect to help John Michael Bowen. They set up offices in Belfast. But we don't have, unfortunately, any of the other designs. I think it would have been great if we were able to find some of them, because you would have seen what the memorial could have been. It would have been a great thing to have, but we don't have any of them, unfortunately.
If you needed a new building today, say, for instance, something, you had to leave this one, and you put an open competition again for a new building. In your opinion, do you think there'd be any better response maybe from local architects?
Well, I don't know. I think 62 entries is quite a good response for the time. I don't know much about the local architecture scene in Northern Ireland. Of course, we do have white ink architects on the 4th floor, so they might put in a bid if we wanted to build a new building.
Are there any more questions? Bring them on. I think it is regular school trips or presentations to the children, is it?
Yeah, so there's about 3,000 school children come in every year, and they would come into the museum and go upstairs, and our learning facility would give them a wee talk all about the Second World War, and then they would come down and they would have different activities around the museum, and they would have another talk. It's on the curriculum for P4s, basically, so that's our main age group that we get in. But I mean, our learning facilitator is swept off her feet, really. She usually has a school in every day. She's a wee break this week, obviously, it being a half term.
Okay, any more questions?
What about items coming in? How often would you get items coming in? Is it very regularly?
Well, I mean, I think Jim's probably best pressed.
It depends on time of year. I've only been here since January, and then I felt like someone just opened the house. I thought, wait, hold on, when you started here, and they just came in. They came in everything from a collection of letters, which I've been working my way through. There's, I think, it's about 120, 130 letters from servicemen that said in House up in Port Stewart. We had a 6th Airborne Captain's Unit got brought in, again, a family. They went through this whole story about how there was a flood in the house and the roof collapsed and this fell out of the ceiling. And it turned out it was actually a great uncle like that. And they didn't want to give it a home, and they did about here, they kind of, which would be interesting, and it would be, of course, we wanted. But they didn't have much of the story. Then that got processed and the section, the part of the collection, and then there was a lady came in from Canada, and she was chasing these long lost relatives that she discovered they have, and they said, "Oh, their grandfather's tunic," and the opposite she came down, and then. Tell me, do you think that we get a stone? Do you have another bit? I said, "Oh, we bit then." It's all very emotional. And they come in everything from tunics, the collections of letters. So we had that long rush in winter or summer. Sort of it slowed down a wee bit. So there doesn't seem to be any pattern. So to know I spotted, but you get a wide variation sort of thing donated. But we have very strict criteria. Because sometimes someone will come out and go, "Would you like this?" And it's the mortar round, and then it's actually it wasn't a live one, but then it turns out it was bought the French one, and it was bought for someone on holiday. I love to, but criteria. So we have to be quite firm with this because space is limitless. So yeah, we have to have very strict criteria that it has to be Second World War and where they were looking from. Things with conditions, if they have brain things that are moldy or something like something that's on the ignition, but we'll see how it goes. It has actually been quite a bumper year, actually, because every group, I think, since I started the session, 1,000 objects.
Wow.
And wow is what I said, well, that was the number, yeah. So, and when they come in, we say, well, we're very clear that we can't guarantee that we'll go on display, because there's much space to display things, but what we can do, like, can curate it, we can look after it. We can't give it a home and let people access it for the future generation.
Do the administration people make it on the building if something, say, was in an auction house for sale, pertinent to the building here or to the war, would they purchase it?
Yeah, so it would usually go to the board, and there would be a budget set if there was anything in particular that we'd want to acquire. I think most recently it was the William Connor painting. That was the most recent thing we bought at auction, and that was one of his wartime paintings.
Would that be displayed there, or?
It will be displayed when there's plans that the refurbished will display, and it will definitely take part in it. It's all for conservation. So if there's no more questions, or is it just too shy and don't want to say, there's tea and coffee at the back. So we want to have another dose of tea and coffee at Becky's, and maybe have a chat in private. Far away. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. That was a great talk. Certainly, I found myself finding everything that perhaps shooters normally do. But again, thanks very much for coming out, and maybe another round of applause for Michael for a great talk.